Okay. Hi everyone. It's good to see everybody here. Based on people's responses about the microphone is working.
Just to say you're here.
Okay, it's working just in that section. That's the only laugh that I got. Okay, now it's working over there.
It is late enough that I
Now it's even louder. Okay.
have to get my son to soccer practice. So, good week though. It seems like there's been a lot of good things happening this week. It's really impressive. How's that? Really? Oh, amazing. Well, I think the program is good. Oh, amazing. Congratulations to me. Yeah. Awesome.
All right, everyone, let's get started. Okay, so good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the second event of this year's Arts Career Conversation Series, The Art of Multilingual Careers. My name is Ashley Sampson, and I am a proud UBC arts student. I major in Ancient Mediterranean and Middle Eastern Archaeology, and I minor in Scandinavian and Nordic Studies. As someone who has language be a big part of both my major and my minor, I'm very excited to be the moderator for tonight's program. I would like to start off by acknowledging that UBC's Vancouver Point Grey campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I recognize we all come from many different places, near and far, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of these lands as well. On behalf of the Faculty of Arts and the Center for Student Involvement and Careers, I'd like to extend a special thank you to all of our alumni who are joining us here this evening to share their experiences with us. So before we begin, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Laura Moss, Associate Dean of Dean of Students for the Faculty of Arts, who will provide our opening remarks for this evening.
Thank you. All right. So indeed, my name is Laura Moss, and I'm the Associate Dean of Students. I'm also an English professor. which makes me sound quite monolingual, but I've studied 4 other languages, so I'm actually, this topic is very close to my heart. I am multilingual, and I really value the conversation that's going to be held today, to really think about what you do when you think in different pathways, you think in different ways through the different languages. So when I think in French, I think differently than when I think in German. English, Spanish, Latin, those are my languages. They're all very close to each other, and they mean I can translate across them, which is very useful, but also very powerful, I think. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm just absolutely delighted to have the panelists here. So Abby, Alika, and Lukai, welcome and thank you. So on behalf of the Faculty of Arts and the Center for Student Enrollment and Careers and the Arts Alumni team, our wonderful organizers here, I do want to extend that welcome. This event is being held in partnership with the inaugural Arts Multilingual Week. So joining us today, we have David Gramling, who is a professor of German and head of the Department of Central, Eastern, and Northern European Studies. I also want to shout out to Viz Nidam, who's a lecturer in the Department of Central, Eastern, and Northern European Studies, as being one of the co-organizers of Arts Multilingual Week. I understand that there have been wonderful days of events celebrating all aspects of multilingualism and being here to celebrate. And it's just so great that this panel gets to be part of this inaugural week. Arts career conversations are designed to inspire and prepare art students to create fulfilling careers. And I really think that they're powerful. It's powerful to listen to people who have gone before you. It's powerful to think about what their paths have been, what got them to where they are. You know, very few paths are linear. So hopefully we get to hear tonight about some of the twists and turns in what got you to where you are. I've read all of your bios, and you've had fantastic twists and turns, it sounds like. So I'm looking forward to that. I want you to be sure to check out the career content that we produce through the Compass Student Arts Engagement Hub, and think about the Arts Career Design Studio. Look that up on Compass. And after the event, you'll be receiving a survey, so please do go ahead and fill that out. And without further ado, I hand it back to Ashley and the panel.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Moss. All right, so thank you. And before we begin tonight's program, I would like to ask everyone in attendance to let us know here today by scanning the QR code, which is just up on the screen. You will be asked to put in the password, which is 1234, which is also up on the screen. And then it'll be asked to input your student number. If you have difficulty moving to the next screen, just press enter on your keyboard. By signing in for tonight's event in this way, you will receive extra resources by email tomorrow, and this will also help us better plan for future events. The Arts Career Conversation Series is an opportunity for current arts students to connect with arts alumni and to hear firsthand about their career journeys and the relationship between their student experiences and career development. As a student that has been here in their bachelor's for a very long time, alumni guidance is very, very important to me. And tonight's theme, The Art of Multilingual Careers, was designed to showcase how an arts degree can successfully leverage to build a career that incorporates knowledge of multiple languages. The world today is complex and increasingly international, and multilingualism plays a role in connecting people and solving global issues. Tonight's panelists represent the public, private, and non-profit sectors in a variety of functional roles, demonstrating that it's possible to leverage language skills in a variety of contexts and in service of various outcomes. So a little bit about each of our alumni. We'll start with Avneet. Avneet Johal graduated from UBC in 2010 with a Bachelor of Arts in French and Spanish. He currently works as an international student recruiter and advisor for UBC's International Student Initiative. He is a former delegate to the United Nations, where he worked to improve international cooperation in outer space. Next, we have Aloka. In 2014, she graduated from UBC with a BA in Asian Language and Culture, major in Chinese. Aloka currently works as the Board Secretary and Government Relations Liaison in the Office of the CEO at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. She was previously based in Shanghai, where she worked for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Rio Tinto, China. And graduating from UBC in 2007 with a BA in Asian Studies and Linguistics, the Kay Sham now works as a freelance translator. Their recent collaborations include Fontaine Films, UC Berkeley, and UBC. Before we get started with the questions, I would just like to invite each of you guys to share a little bit more about your career path so far and how you got started in your field, kind of staying within the context of multilingualism and whether that's something you brought with you to UBC, learned at UBC, and just how it's helped you along the way right now. We can start with Ebony.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashley, and thank you to everyone who's here in attendance, and thank you to all the teams who have helped to host this evening. It's really exciting to be in this particular space, the Our Student Center, and to be talking about multilingualism, which was such an important part of my undergraduate experience and has been ever since my academic experience here at UBC in terms of all that I've done, not just in terms of the languages, but also in terms of the ways of thinking, and that Dr. Moss spoke about opening ourselves up to different pathways. And I think that has been a key feature of the different work that I've done since my time as a student and my time at UBC. And so we heard a little bit in the introduction and the bio about work in the field of outer space, and I think that that probably matches up most closely with an endless curiosity just to learn more about everything around us, and I think language has allowed me to do that in a very unique way. It was important to think about not only how we speak and how we communicate, but also how we think and how that translates into how we exist and move around in the places that we occupy. In terms of my field, it's always an interesting question. I feel like I have various fields. Working in the field of international student recruitment, I think it's likely clear how languages play a role in that, but I think there may be some surprising aspects that hopefully come up in the panel later tonight. But I think in terms of languages, just connecting with communities locally and globally has been the way that the language has helped me most in thinking about next steps in personal and professional spaces.
Hi, I'm Aloka. Really nice to be here and to meet all of you guys. I started learning Mandarin at UBC, so when I began my path, I had zero knowledge. I couldn't even say hello. So to go from that to graduating was a huge accomplishment for me. And then that led me to travel internationally and work internationally, which has been so mind-opening and beneficial, I would say, for myself. And yeah, just for my knowledge of how the world works, which has eventually led me to working at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. And that is like a research think tank that works with the government of Canada. And they do research on policy, so they try to help sort of inform policy for the Canadian government. So my interest is beyond just language itself, but it is like the connection between countries and cultures. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Aloka. So my name is Kay. That's actually the Chinese or Cantonese version of saying Ricky. That's my English name. LK Sham is my pen name, where I've translated about 50 books in Hong Kong. So when I just want to shout out to Dr. Maas, because when she talked about linear path, my path is really not linear. It's kind of circular, but in fact, I was thinking about it just now. It's kind of a spiral, because I was born in Hong Kong when it was a British colony. I came to Canada, studied here, graduated from UBC, went back to Hong Kong, which became a special administrative region of China after its handover. And then now I come back to Canada. It's like just going around in circles. I think that's what language, multiple languages has actually meant to me, because going back to Hong Kong after graduating here with a BA in Chinese, I was actually making a pilgrimage to my own heritage. And it was something that I had planned my whole life, but it turned out to be very surprising, and maybe we'll talk about it as we delve in to the conversation tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to each and every one of you. Now we're going to dive into our panel discussion. I have some questions here that I prepared for the alumni, and please note there will be an audience Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, please hold on to them and we'll get to you once the discussion is over. Okay? All right, so the first question that I would love to ask you guys is, what is one joy and one challenge of your current role? If you've held multiple roles that draw upon your language skills and have these joys and challenges differ between any of these roles or employers, Abdi, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Great question. I should check if any of my current employers are in the space before I talk. There are so many things I really enjoy about my current work, but to think about some of those from mostly a linguistic perspective or a multilingual perspective, a big part of my work and a primary focus of my work here at UBC's Vancouver campus is supervising a team of undergraduate students who serve as official representatives and ambassadors of the university. And this group is as diverse as the undergraduate student population here at UBC, which is about as diverse as it gets, with students from all different home regions, different perspectives, histories, and ancestries that they bring with them. And it's such a wonderful team to work with and to be a part of. And that's the thing that I enjoy the most. And I think that my background in languages, and not beyond the actual languages itself, because of course language of instruction here at UBC is English, everybody's proficient in English, but it's so much more than that. More than half of our incoming students here at UBC are fluent in at least 2 languages. People are bringing lots with them, lots of ideas. And I think what my background in having a multilingual background, what that allows me to do in a more unique way is to leverage all of the talents and skills and ideas that people bring with them, and to already have that default openness that the way that I might think about something or the way that another team member might think about something is vastly different to how somebody else might think about something. And I was having this conversation earlier today, and it was about essentially having some feedback conversations. And of course, this is all in English. But the thing that I have maybe enjoyed the most and learned the most is over my years of working with such a diverse team, every time we have open conversations, I learn a new perspective from somebody who comes to our team. And the nature of student work is that people will be with your team for 2, 3, maybe 4 years, and then they'll graduate and move on, and you'll have more members joining the team. And so now I feel like on all of these ideas that I started with maybe a few perspectives, after a certain number of years, I've now increased those to so many, and now when I go into different conversations, all of those perspectives that have come from other people are now part of my toolkit. And I think that allows me to have a lot more engaging and open conversations with different members of our team. So I think that's something I really enjoy, and that's been a big connection with the multilingual piece. And maybe very quickly to add on to that, another thing that I enjoy, of course, is traveling on behalf of the university. And so I've been to a lot of different places around the world, whether it's Indonesia, Western Europe, places across the Americas. And when I'm in those spaces, getting to interact with the families of students who are thinking about coming to UBC, and often the families will present different questions, both linguistically but also culturally. And they'll just being able to understand the motivation or thought process behind somebody's question beyond the words that they're using, and being able to have a sense of the ideas that are behind the words, it allows you to make a more meaningful connection, which then leads to us being able to build trust. I know the question was also things that we don't enjoy, or challenge. From a linguistic perspective, or just any perspective?
Maybe linguistic.
Okay. I think one of the challenges is working with, again, we have a very diverse team of staff that will go and represent the university in different parts of the world, and it can be challenging to have a unified approach, or to have alignment with how we connect with prospective students, or how we connect with others, or how we message different features of UBC, because you can provide one sort of messaging, and those words are going to land very differently to somebody in one part of the world, and the exact same words are going to land very differently for somebody else. And then you've got people who are like, just tell us clearly, like, what is this thing? And sometimes it is near impossible, or we've yet to find a way to communicate with the whole world with static information, maybe on a website, or in a presentation, or a short period of time. And so I think that can be the challenge, is we are trying to be one centralized place connecting with the whole world, but everybody's got different sorts of expectations, whether it's about language or even cultural expectations. So sometimes there are expectations about how we dress, and that's getting away from language, but thinking about culture. And so how everything that we do, it has those cultural components and cultural expectations. And so for us to interact with the whole world, that can be a challenge. It's a fun challenge for us, but I think a challenge nevertheless.
No, I definitely agree. And kind of talking, about like leveraging, like your talents and fluency. You mentioned that you came to UBC without, like just starting in Mandarin. And what was, how does that help, like your experience?
And so, how has what helped?
So like you came into UBC just starting this new language. Like that experience must have been like so different.
How does it help my current role?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so it basically has formed, like my degree in Asian language and culture has formed my career path, safe to say, and also safe to say language and culture are so inextricably connected that I quickly learned outside of the university context that studying a language is very much studying a culture. So when I went to Shanghai, I'll focus on that because at my current role I don't use Mandarin in my day-to-day. But I think learning the business culture in China is so different than learning the business culture in Canada. And so one of the hugest lessons, both a joy and a challenge, was just learning about that culture, and in particular the emphasis on hierarchy. So it's extremely important to know who's at the top and who's on the bottom and where you sit, and to have respect for that and to know how to navigate it properly. So that was just a huge challenge, and I definitely had moments of missing my cultural cues and having to learn the hard way. Because it's such a different world, and I think there's so much benefit to learning that in a really visceral way, so in an experiential way. So being there and actually working in a corporate office in China, I wouldn't have learned that here, and I wouldn't have learned that in a classroom. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And Kay, what about you? Do you want me to rephrase the question, or?
Well, let me just, because I was thinking about the joy and the challenge, right? I think the joy of my experience, my career path, which I went through being a teacher in Hong Kong, teaching at colleges with students who actually had quite low self-esteem, just because in Asia, quite different from Canada, testing is very important. And some people I didn't fare well in a testing environment. And I was also a transfer student to UBC. So because of my own experience, I was able to connect with students who felt that they have failed when actually the system failed them. And working with these students and getting to know them, sharing my own experiences with them, connecting with them, I think that's how language has helped me. And my last position, a full-time position in Hong Kong, I actually worked in the Faculty of Medicine in Hong Kong University, HKU. And it was another type of student. A lot of the medical schools in Asia have top-notch students. But when I talked with them and when I connected with them in my role as a student engagement officer, I found that they have another sort of self-esteem issues. They feel that I was the top at my high school, but now I'm among a group of peers, and I have a lot of pressure. And how do I, how to compete? I thought I was the best, but how can I deal with the fact that I'm not the best? And being able to, again, leverage my own experience and connecting with them, because by then I've been working in Hong Kong for 15 years. I've also been in very successful positions. I've also had my downfalls, I think. And so I was able to let them know failing is not actually something that you should be ashamed of. It should be something part of your life experience and your learning experience. And I think the joy to connect with people through language and through culture, and a lot of language has to do with culture. I think that's something that I really pride in. A challenge, I mentioned that I've been through different careers, I've actually had a lot of setbacks throughout the 15 years in Hong Kong. And some of it's related to like cultural misunderstandings. I thought I knew, I look Chinese, but I realized that I didn't really think Chinese. And so I would have met with some setbacks and I met with challenges. But at the same time, it became a learning experience. And I've fallen, but I've come back up again. And today I'm here, I'm very honored to be a panelist. People, when I tell them about this opportunity, they say, oh wow, you just returned to Canada for a year and you've already been invited to speak at the university. And you're not even a teacher or like an educator. And I'm very proud of where I am now. And it's the challenges that brought me to this place, speaking with you. And I think that's what I think language has helped me achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks, Lucky, for sharing that tidbit about setbacks. And kind of keeping on that topic, and getting back up, could each of you tell us about a time your language abilities really mattered in the workplace? And could you have predicted the ways in which your multilingual competence would be valued beyond fluency itself? Maybe Aloka, you could touch base on this a little bit for us first.
Well, of course, practically speaking, having Mandarin in my toolkit, living in Shanghai, I was able to use all of the apps in Chinese, which was so helpful. So just living, like renting an apartment, baking, doing that all in Mandarin was a huge feat, but so satisfying. So that just allowed being there to be way easier than I could tell for my friends in Shanghai who were English native speakers but did not speak Mandarin. So I had a sort of a leverage there. But in the workplace, I think I had a greater sensitivity to how Mandarin native speakers, Chinese culture, how they sort of thought and how people operated, just because I had worked so hard to study the language. So I guess just the nature of studying the language and being in the city and in the place just helped me, so much to do my job better and be accepted by my colleagues as well. That was a big one. They appreciated me being able to, have a conversation with them in Mandarin, or if their English ability was lacking, for me to switch and try to speak to them in Mandarin. And there was like a commonality that we shared.
Thank you. And Licky, I actually wanted to touch base on something that you mentioned, was how it felt, maybe a lot of people were depending on you for what you knew and for how, you studied and all of these things. And maybe could you talk a bit more about your experience in the workplace that way?
Well, I wouldn't say that people depended on me. I mean, I contributed at different capacities, as a teacher, as a university administrator, as a translator. I think what really helped me, I think, being multilingual. I mean, I speak, my mother tongue is Cantonese, of course. It's very closely related to Mandarin Chinese that Loka speaks. But it's, it's also not very, people might have a hard time trying to communicate if they speak these two different dialects of Chinese. And also growing up here and educated here at UBC, of course I spoke English. But I think what I wanted to say is that being multilingual has allowed me to think and know and be sensitive to differences, minute differences that I think people who only speak one language might not be exposed to. I was just recently working on a translation piece where I had to translate words like cedar, fir, pine. I'm not sure, I'm not a botanist, I don't know the differences between these three concepts. But when I tried to translate these, and I found people who have translated them before, they've actually made mistakes. And why did they make these mistakes? It's not because they were less learned than me, they knew less. It's just that because the concepts of what did I mention? Fir, cedar, and pine in English are different from, for example, the same concepts of different trees in Chinese. So they might have just interpreted that tree differently and thus have a different translation for the same tree. And it goes back to because here in Canada, we live in a very, English kind of centric kind of way of classification, right? We have the faculty of arts, the faculty of science, etc., etc. It's a very Western kind of conception. It's not like that in traditional China. I mean, it's now, the Chinese have adopted in modern times a very similar Western conception of what knowledge is. But in traditional, in ancient China, in traditional thinking, they have a different kind of concept of what knowledge is. And being able to be multilingual and think in different languages, you are blessed with this, I think, feat where you can think in the same things in different terms, and it would help you. And I think that's one of the things that I found really powerful in my career.
Thank you. All right, Avneesh, what about you?
It's a great question, and I'd like to build off of the previous response there. I think there were a couple of key words that really jumped out to me, and one was the exposure, and the second was the sensitivity. And I think the exposure is such an important idea to be thinking about, because it's not for me necessarily the other language or the additional language or the additional languages that you may speak. It's really that exposure to these different ideas of how you might approach a very similar concept. Whether it's classification, whether it's how you categorize your thoughts, whether it's how you observe and interpret the world around you. That interpretation can be so different. And those different languages allow you to begin thinking a little bit more about how somebody else might approach similar concepts. And I think an area where I wouldn't have thought that this would have happened when I was a student, but it's happened so much in my professional experiences and the professional spaces that I've been in, be it at UBC, whether it's in the political space or any other space, is having a sensitivity to the ways in which people might express themselves. And I can think of countless examples where I've been in a meeting or I've been around a table and I'm noticing that two different people are expressing themselves in slightly different ways, and you can see the beginnings of miscommunication. Sometimes the stakes are quite low. Sometimes the stakes have been quite high. And when you're in that space and you're able to see, okay, I can see from this person's perspective what they're trying to express, or the reason that they're using these words, because you might have more of a sense of what that word might mean to somebody who's speaking English as a second language or newer to these ideas. You have a sense of, okay, I can see what's being communicated, really beyond the words. Again, thinking about the ideas, thinking about the concepts. And then you've got somebody else who's doing something similar, and you can find a way to bring alignment to that potential for miscommunication. And when you can spot that early, it allows you to, and you have that sensitivity, you can ask some of those clarifying questions. Or you can ask follow-up questions. I'm curious, what makes you suggest this? Or what gives you that impression? Or what led you to that place? And just asking some of those clarifying questions, because you've got a sense of what's happening, allows people to express themselves slightly differently. You can contextualize things in a different way, and then everybody around the room, okay, we got it. This is where we're going. And that doesn't always mean that everybody is going to be in agreement, but at least when they're disagreeing, they know what they're disagreeing about, which allows you to take the next step in a much more effective and a much more, again, sensitive and caring way, as opposed to people missing each other. And when you're able to detect that happening on really small levels and small scales, and you notice a term or a word, that is really, really helpful. And that is not something that I would have thought about before when I was an undergraduate student, but looking back at the past number of years and really my entire professional career, I think what has given me an advantage in the professional workspace is that ability to communicate, that ability to negotiate, the ability to organize and build teams and to lead teams. But a lot of that is just down to having effective communication skills with diverse teams. And the multilingual perspectives have afforded me, I think, a significant competitive advantage in being able to do that in really honest, open, and perhaps most importantly, really sensitive ways.
Okay, so kind of in the same vein, and I have been guilty of this, but some students might think that you could just use your phone to translate things. When I was learning Swedish, I did use Google Translate for just a few things, but sometimes it doesn't always work. There are always words that you can't translate. There are things that are culturally, it just doesn't go both ways. So when you have machine translation platforms that have they've been helpful to you at work. Aloka, you touched on this. But despite or as a compliment to your, has it been a compliment, these machines, to your embodied multilingual capacities? And when and why is an actual embodied multilingual speaking person necessary? That's neat, just because you touched on this and started this question. Do you want to go ahead?
Absolutely, it's such a wonderful question. And I will begin by sharing that I think that there's absolutely a place for these tools. All of these things are tools, and it's for us in terms of sort of how we use them. There's also a high degree of risk. And you can search online for all the unfortunate incidents that come across, that happen because of these sorts of translation devices and tools. It doesn't always work in the way that you intend. And so what I would add to this is, yes, we have this tool, but if you already have that foundational understanding and expertise, it then allows you to use the tool in a much more sophisticated way. So I might search something and I see something that comes up on screen, but then I am filtering that through my own understanding, linguistically, culturally, etc. For, is this really what I was looking for, or how can I adjust this for the particular context that I'm speaking in as well? And we do that all the time in any language. And if we take English as an example, the ways in which I communicate with my family or my parents are not the same ways, or my friends are not the same ways that I communicate with the students that I'm supervising. I can be expressing similar things, but I will use different words and different terms because of the context. And the translation devices often lack context, and it's just so important for communication. So I think there is a place for them. And an example that I can think about where it's been really, really helpful is I've been in different parts of the world, and I'm trying to articulate specific pieces of maybe the admission requirements at UBC, or some aspects, some technical aspects. And it can be really helpful to look up some of those terms. So, and these are specific, maybe industry language. I think that's where these tools can be really, really helpful, because you can look up that term, okay, this is the word, I see that word, okay, and now I can add that into my presentation, or if there's a small moment where you're trying to communicate something, they can have a role to play there. I think to the second part of the question, how I understood the question was, where is a human who can speak multiple languages or has a multilingual perspective more helpful than a machine or a robot? And to me, the big idea is trust. I think humans can build trust with other humans in a way that humans cannot build trust with a machine. And I think that's the overall concept, and that's the sort of approach I would take to this question, is you can have a machine or a robot or a hologram that's saying all the same things, but when a human is saying it, there's something different about that. And then there's also the time factor. And so if somebody asks me a really sensitive question or a really important question or shares something really personal with me, that's kind of awkward to then have Siri or Alexa or Google say that unfortunate or personal sensitive piece through their voice. It's really taking away from the moment here, and you're not able to have that really rich, meaningful connection with somebody where they feel that you've not only heard their words, but you've understood what they're trying to express to you. And that's something that I think only humans can do. And so, yeah, my overall response to that would be there's no replacement for the trust that you can build between people.
Absolutely. Aloka, what about you?
Yeah, well, obviously, having a degree in Mandarin, I've used these tools many times. But I would say this, that just really practically speaking, there are often like 10 different choices for a single word. And you don't know what one to choose unless I didn't know which one to choose unless I had like a native Mandarin speaking friend to be like, hey, which one do I use? And they're for really simple words like, take or bring. So just to reiterate Meet's point that you do need a human to be able to understand the context properly, to know what words to use. So yeah, machines don't always work because you need the context. And then, of course, with language and communication, there's always subtleties and nuances, and it's knowing how to convey those that only comes from, I think, a human mind.
Well, I mean, I need to be very clear that I am a translator, so I'm against using machine translation as a stance. But I mean, I'm also guilty of using a lot of the tools that's made available to me. I think, I mean, I like to say that they are very valuable tools. I think that, but then that's what they are. They're tools for human beings to use. And if you do not have the ability to use or utilize the tool given to you, in the wrong hands it could go very bad. In the right hands, it would be very beautiful. So I think what I do feel the importance, we're talking about sensitivity to words. Is human necessary? I mean, if if you think about it, if we're not human, then what are we, and why are we in existence? This is a very existential question that we're being asked right now today at the panel. I think, but then while I think it's important for humans to use these tools, I think how you use these tools and what kind of outcome manifests, I think, is what differentiates between me and you and everyone else, I think. For example, a lot of the work I do translating children's books, some of them are for Disney. So I do the Hong Kong market, and then they use the same two languages, Chinese, the written language, Chinese and English. So they're bilingual books, which have different markets in China. In China, in Taiwan, who uses these same languages, and they like to have these books translated in a similar manner. But how each country or a region translate, for example, Up, the movie Up, is different because they have to cater to the audience, the readers, who are either Hong Konger readers, Taiwanese readers, or mainland Chinese readers, because there's subtle cultural differences between these different readers. We have to cater to the readers when we do the translation. And so I don't even want to compare myself to a machine. I can't even, I'm actually incomparable to a Mandarin-speaking translator because I'm a Cantonese-speaking translator. And even that difference can make a very, or create a very different product and a very different output when I'm doing translation, and I think the human touch is indispensable, right? And how you learn from the language and how you give back or create something new. I think that's the power of a language, and the interaction between different languages will help create that. And we as humans have the power to create language, and multilingualism definitely will help.
All right, thank you so much for that. So to kind of round out our lovely conversation here, my final question would be, what advice would you give to a student or a recent graduate who is keen to highlight their language skills in a job search, and once hired to leverage these skills in the workplace? That's really interesting considering that we just came back from 2 years of not really having that one-on-one interaction in our language classes because Zoom, the pandemic, so anything would be super helpful. Ebony, do you want to bring it back to you?
Sure. Happy to start with this question. So it's a really important question for some clear reasons. And I think my response will maybe not come as a huge surprise given some of the responses that I've shared already. And I feel like I've really gone beyond just the language itself and just the words and being able to speak in a different language. For me, the question is, well, what does that give you access to? What pathways does that open up for you? What additional perspectives does that give you? What cultural understanding might that give you? How might that enhance your communication in another language, and maybe in your native language? Maybe that's English. How does it improve your English? And there are so many skills and attributes that come with exploring a different language, which comes with it a different culture, which comes with it a different perspective, which comes with it the ability to reflect and ask yourself questions differently, the ability to increase your own self-awareness, the ability to understand that we all have default positions and biases with everything that we do, and that ours is not somehow universal or it will not be necessarily matched or mirrored by other. These concepts are so important when we are working with other people and working in diverse teams, in diverse organizations. We're looking to bring new ideas and new perspectives to old problems. These are all things that I think come from exploring languages and ideas and perspectives. So my strong advice is to really go beyond, oh, I can speak this language, or I can speak 2 languages, or 3 languages, or 5, or whatever it may be, and to ask yourself the question, when you're looking to go into a particular industry or you're looking to apply for a particular type of job, ask yourself the question, what skills does my multilingual perspective and background and experience, what skills does that provide to me? And what skills do I have where those skills are enhanced because of that multilingual position? And I think these are transferable to any industry. And we just have to find the ways in which they connect. And that, I think, can then help us communicate that skill. You could almost do that without even mentioning the language. I have worked extensively to train and to learn and to practice how to approach things from a different cultural perspective or from a different historical perspective. That enhances my communications in these ways. And we haven't even mentioned the actual language there. And so that would be my advice, is to go beyond just the language itself. What else comes with it? And then what is your unique proposition, given your multilingual position, based and sort of in reference to and relative to the industry or the profession or the job that you're applying for. And I think with that thought process, you'll be able to come up with something that no other applicant can provide. And that is a pretty neat thing to be able to share to somebody.
Loka?
I guess I would just add to that, in my own experience, I would actually use Mandarin in my interview. So I would make sure to sort of try to speak and use the skills and showcase that. Also, you know, recruiters, they ask for job letters, so you could write a bit in whatever language it is in the letter or in the email message, just to showcase your ability. Beyond just writing down on a resume, I have such and such level of this particular language. So yeah, just using it, showcasing it.
Yeah, I mean, I second what Aloka is saying. I think it's important, especially in a kind of international context, to really showcase your different language skills. Even though, like, for most people, I think, like the cover letter that Aloka was mentioning, most likely would be written in English. But at the same time, if you write an English cover letter in Hong Kong versus in Canada, it's a very different structure. They want to look for very different things. And by knowing the different languages and through the language, knowing more about the different cultures, wherever you end up or you land, I think it would help you to land the job if you know what works at this specific environment that you are looking for a job. I mean, I've returned to Canada for about a year right now. I've been working on just finishing up some of my translation projects that I've been working in Hong Kong and bringing them over. and I'm actually starting to look for like a position. Hopefully BBC might hire me. But I mean, so I'm coming back. For example, like I just noticed a lot of things that are so different in 2022 Canada versus 2007 when I left. For example, now on my email signature, I would have in parentheses he, they. That's not something that I would have written in my email signature 15 years ago. It's something that I acquired after returning to Canada. It's not something that we've been doing in Hong Kong, obviously. I shouldn't say obviously, but then it just wasn't the practice. I remember actually acknowledging that we are now in the unceded ancestral or traditional territory of the Musqueam peoples. That's not something that we used to say or acknowledge as Canadian citizens, but something new. So I think it's important that through language and through cultural learning, I think we get to know who we are communicating with, and we should try to accommodate the communication. And I think that's actually a lot of language learners have learned, that that's what we actually do when we learn languages, is we try to accommodate each other. And as humans, we try to work together to have 1 + 1 = 3 relationship. And I think that helps having multiple languages. One language plus a second language actually means more than just 2 languages. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, so that's the end of our panel, everyone. Thank you all. We now want to open the floor for some audience questions. So please raise your hands if you have any, and please indicate if your question is for a specific panelist or for all of them. Does anyone have any immediate questions they would like to ask? Yes?
Yeah. Oh, thank you all. It's oh wow. It's okay. I thank you all for your discussion. I really appreciate being here and listening. I guess this is directed to all of you. Perhaps if you were using your second language as something that you've learned later in life, so you were born speaking your second language. I was wondering, as somebody who has learned second language later and I'm continuing to learn that, as people who have worked in your second language, something that I found is bridging the distinction between I'm learning this language to I speak this language, and I can speak this language to I can work in this language, is I find a very different thing. You know, it's very different to be in a classroom and feel like I can understand almost everything that's said to me from most people, but as soon as I'm responsible for a role in the job, like, did you feel like you had a moment where you were like, I can be responsible as an employee in my second language that I've learned? Yeah, something that I'm trying to figure out as I continue learning. Thank you.
All right, who would like to start with that one? Okay, Evan.
Sure. Happy to take it. It's a wonderful question because it's. I would say it's not necessarily linear either. I think you can get to a certain point, and then without the exposure and the experience and the continued practice, we're either using it or we're losing it. And I think we have to continue working towards that. And I don't think there's ever. I think there can be a moment where we feel we have that comfort and that confidence, but I would liken that to almost any other aspect of our work and our professional skills, that there's that moment where it sort of happens, but I think to an extent, I think we've got to put ourselves in that situation and gain that exposure and pick up that experience. I have learned several languages that haven't been household languages or languages that I've learned later in life, and I think there have been moments where I have felt much more comfortable working in a professional space in that language, maybe a few years ago, than I do today, because I may not use them so much. And I was on a trip recently where I was speaking French, and it takes a day, couple days, and then you sort of, okay, like I got this. I'm sort of back in that position. And so I think that experience and exposure are the two most important aspects. What I would add to this is, again, likening it to any other aspect of our work and what we contribute to a community or a workplace, is communicating and expressing how we're feeling about that. And I can think of times where I've been in that place and I've shared openly with everybody else that, I'm just coming back, I haven't been speaking in this particular language, if it's French or Spanish or another, so much recently. And so that is something that I just express and communicate, and I think people appreciate that and they can understand that, and then they have that additional context, and so their expectations are a little bit different. I can ask for some help or I can ask for some support. Sometimes I might be going into a meeting and I might ask, okay, I'm going to receive information today. Would it be okay if I come back tomorrow with my proposal? And maybe it doesn't have to happen right in that moment. And so I think there are always things that we can do to set ourselves up for success, but that can be with anything, and I think the same is true for language. And that would be one of my recommendations, is to think a little bit about where am I at, and that awareness is so helpful. And then once we have an awareness of what our needs might be to support us, to position ourselves for success, how then can I articulate that to my community? And I think there are ways in which we can do that. And we can even ask for that support. This is my first time trying to do this language. I would love to receive some feedback on what are some of the pieces that I miss? What are some of the cultural cues that I might miss? How might I be able to do something differently? Can we set something up with, maybe there's a mentor in that community who can provide you with some support or advice maybe at the end of every week. And then without that invitation, people may not be looking out for those things with the same level of attention and detail. And so only if we have that conversation do we then get that feedback that supports us in the next time we're making that same endeavor. So lots of ways that we can set ourselves up for success, but exposure and experience.
Yeah, just to reiterate that, I think this is true just in any career path. You're never going to be perfect when you go in. And just to know that and to be willing to kind of fumble a little bit along the way, you will learn, and just to trust that you'll keep going. And especially with language, it's continuous. If you don't use it, you might lose it. So yeah, you do have to practice and continue to learn, but not to be afraid. Yeah, for sure.
And I think, I mean, again, I haven't been in the Canadian kind of job market for quite a long time, but I think based on my experience in Asia, I think something in, I think, the recent decade is something, a concept that keeps on popping up in the job market is a concept of lifelong learning. And it's just because I think if you go back 50 years ago, before we have computers, before we have the internet, a lot of people really can work at a job, be very good at that job, and work for 50 years and retire. And they don't really need to learn that much. But I think the internet and the computer and AI has changed a lot of that. And we are experiencing like a knowledge explosion where new things keep on coming up. And especially for language learners, I think a lot of times we rely on dictionaries, but have you ever thought of how old that compiler of that advanced learner's dictionary may be? He might have been born in the 1920s, and you're now reading his work. And so their language learners have always been, there has been always been a gap in trying to pick up what's actually happening at the language at this moment. And I think that there is a point in everyone's life, especially when you come up to the job market and join the job and the workforce, is that we stop thinking about being a language learner, but just being a language observer. We observe what's happening at the workplace, which might be very different from academic English. It might be very different from the textbook English that you learn about. And you just start acquiring it. But I just want to kind of step back and just kind of let everyone think about it. But isn't that what we do as native speakers of the language? For example, back when I was young, that was decades ago, we would say, "Oh, bro, what's up, bro?" But nowadays, I hear people say, "Bro, what's up, bro?" So I mean, language changes, and you just need to go with the flow. And I mean, being a second language learner, it might be harder in the sense that because you do not have that native intuition of that language, it might take you a little bit more effort to get with the flow and acquire the latest slang or the latest trend in communication. But I think it's whether you are a monolingual speaker or a multilingual speaker, I think it's the same process, and it's a lifelong process. And I mean, you can spend a little bit more time or a little bit more effort on it, maybe, if it's a second language, but I mean, then you do reap the fruits of your labor, I think. And so don't worry too much about learning the language, trying to empower yourself and take charge. Maybe you will start a new trend in the new language, and people will follow your footsteps, right?
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? I saw you back there, and then we'll get to you. So, Anne.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I have a question for Kay. So, yeah, I'm a Mandarin speaker right now, and I'm just starting kind of stepping into the world of translation. And yeah, I recently, well, not recently, but I translated a little bit, variety shows, videos on my own for fun. But do you have any suggestion to the beginner translators? What would you recommend them to do at first, and what should they learn continuing as a translator?
Thank you for that question. I don't want to take credit. It's something that I read when I was studying translation myself. Again, I'm a Chinese major, so translation wasn't actually the kind of the profession that I was studying for. I kind of stepped into this role when the opportunity arose. But from what I understand, for example, you mentioned variety shows, and so these must be things that you like, because I think we always start with doing things that we like to do. We like to translate this particular show. We like watching this show. A lot of people like to watch Friends, and they start translating Friends. The only, I think, the only advice that I've found really useful is that you start with translating something into the language that you are the native speaker of. So, for example, you mentioned that you're a Mandarin speaker. I would suggest translating from another language into Mandarin before you start translating the other way around. Just because, for example, variety shows, a lot of slang, a lot of very colloquial language. As a second language learner, if you do not live, for example, a local lived in Shanghai, so she knows the slang of Shanghai and Mandarin Chinese, but without being immersed in that culture, you might not be able to pick up the colloquial language or the slang of a particular place. So if, for example, you wanted to translate something into English, and if there is a cultural tinge to the material that you need to translate, it's not impossible, but it's quite hard. And in that case, I always rely on native speakers. When I have to translate something from Cantonese to Mandarin, for example, I always ask a native speaker. It's not that I'm not fluent in Mandarin, very proficient in it, but it's never a bad idea to ask someone who's actually more fluent than you, because no matter how fluent you may get, there are people who are more fluent than you all the time, even if it's the same language. And so I think you just start with something that that you know, and you can branch off from that. Yeah. Thank you.
And then we had another question over here.
Hi, so also another question for Nikkei, also about translation. Can I ask how your experience working freelance was?
Okay, that's not very good, not very good question for me to answer. But so for because it's everyone's experience is different. I think For me, how I started translating is that I met people, and people got to know me, and they got to know my language skills, and they wanted to give me an opportunity, and I was very grateful to have that opportunity. So I think when we talk about language, it's also a lot about people skills, because communication skills. I think, and that's how I got into the industry. I think just because I'm a very people-oriented person, and people got to know me, and I was able to leverage that and get into this career. But I mean, I've also had some pretty bad experiences. For example, there are companies out there who really think that human translators are just glorified computers, and so they would come to you and say, oh, we'd like to have this job done. I think it's only worth 10% of what you're asking for. Will you do it? And well, I mean, obviously I wouldn't do something like that, because I think there is a value that to my work that if you ask a computer to do, it wouldn't have the same value. And so if they are willing to just trust the computer, then they can have whatever output they want. But if they want my interpretation of the material, then I think they should respect what I'm worth. I think that speaks a lot about self-worth, and so it's hard to navigate, especially in translation. I don't know why, but people just seem to have this idea that what we're asking you to do, a computer could do, an idiot could do. So why should we pay you whatever price that you're asking for? And sometimes I get really irritated by, and in that case, and I'm always able to respond and say, well, I mean, if you do want, I mean, if you do have another project that maybe we're more suited to work together for, then I'm up for it. But for the time being, I'm sorry, I can't work with on this project at this time. And so, yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you guys. I think I have a follow-up question from these two young ladies over here, and it's particularly for Ricky as well. So I think the field of translation itself has a lot of wide range of opportunities. I think freelancing is one, and then I think for me particularly, I'm looking into some of these opportunities, and especially the ones that are like that are more, I think they might demand some more like higher education, graduate studies. For example, like simultaneous interpretation. I was wondering maybe you can talk to us and tell us about some of these different options, and especially the ones such as simultaneous interpretation. And then beyond that, and I'm also personally curious on why you made a transition, because I think I missed the very beginning, but I think you talked about right now you're thinking about transitioning to UBC and then out of your current field. Maybe you can. So it's two different questions.
Yeah. Okay. So I hope I could remember both of them. I have very bad memory, but just to kind of respond to the first question. SI, simultaneous interpretation, is extremely difficult, and I have not been trained in that, but I've done it. I've been asked to do it. So my first exposure to something like that was, I mean, my first exposure was like at a parent-teacher conference when I had to simultaneously translate for our parents what the teacher was trying to say and trying to lie about it if it's something bad about me. But professionally speaking, what happened was I was working at a school, and I was just hoisted into a position. There's this parent who doesn't speak the language that was being used at the kind of it's a meeting, I guess, and so you need to help this parent, and they are very, I think, technologically advanced. They have these walkie-talkies or whatever that I speak into, and these two different parents sitting like in different parts of the room, they can hear me. And it's very hard, I mean, from my own experience, it's very hard because you can never translate every single word. And as someone who was actually not a professional and hoisted into this position kind of last minute, what I had to do was to try to get the gist of every sentence and try to translate that. And I think even if you work at the UN, I think a lot of times it ends up being like that. I mean, of course, they're more professional because they've been trained in that. But I think for SI specifically, I think it really requires some training if you want to take it on as a career. I would never, I'm so sorry, I would never do something like that. And because I would get so brain fried, I would just, it would be horrible. The second question, I think, freelance translating have been something that I've been doing for the past, I think, 12 years. But then I've always had a full-time job. And I think I was of the generation where this kind of gig culture was just blossoming. So when I was at the job market, it was very important for people in my environment to have a job. You need to have a job. It has to be a full-time job. For your kind of background, it must be an administrative job, a 9 to 5. And so freelance translating was just an opportunity outside of that job. And I was kind of just joking about UBC, but I mean, I do come from a university administrative background when I was working in Hong Kong. And so if I return to like a full-time, that kind of mentality, then that would be something that would be easier for me to enter into. I'm not saying that that's what I'm going to limit myself, that's the only job market that I can limit myself to. But I think that's just because of the background and my age that we live in that kind of mentality. But I also feel very privileged to be able to be in this kind of transition where I do have a full-time job. I also do some gig work and part-time work on the side, freelancing on the side, and I'm going to enjoy it, both of these identities in different ways. And so I think I feel very privileged to be in this position.
Thank you. And I saw one hand over here.
Thank you all so much. I want to talk about outer space. This person sitting next to me mentioned responsibility and kind of when do you take on the responsibility for the languages that you learn. I was thinking about the firs and the cedars and the pines. I was thinking about outer space and what do you feel like is your responsibility as professionals to make sure that in discussions of outer space, for example, that Anglophone concepts don't dominate the thinking? Or the same thing with pines and cedars. To be able to hold those ideas behind the words as, simultaneously valuable and important when you're talking internationally about a collaboration about outer space and making sure that English doesn't dominate those things. I imagine it's the same thing talking about UBC internationally, concepts like student engagement, what would that be in Mandarin and Cantonese, for example. So I guess I'm just curious for the three of you about that question of multilingual responsibility to safeguard against the dominance of English or Anglophone concepts when working with multilingual constituencies who have really interesting alternate conceptions of like outer space and cosmology and what the universe is and things like that.
Thank you. Nate, do you want to start us off?
Happy to start. I really enjoy thinking about these concepts, and I very much appreciate the question. I think for all of us, it's important to think about our responsibilities and our accountabilities and our obligations to ourselves, to our local communities, and also to our global communities. And I think it started very earlier today when we had a land acknowledgement for where we are. And so I think we all have responsibilities in how we carry ourselves and how we conduct ourselves and how we communicate. And words, it's fun. I'm going to take a different approach to this question, and I'm going to start with the dictionary because that was something that was just brought up. And I've been reading a book recently called Endgame by a fantastic author and activist, Derek Jensen. And one of the earlier chapters of the book, they talk about how each definition in the dictionary is a form of propaganda. And if you were to take the word civilization in a dictionary, the definition is absolutely propaganda. In the way that it's presented as positive, it's presented as advanced, it's presented in all of these what seem to be good terms. But I think there's a way that you could look at our current civilization and suggest that it's very destructive to everything around it, human life and the planet. And that's not included in that definition. And so everything comes with that. We have a responsibility, and language is so powerful because it's about the way that we think and about the way that we interact with the world around us. And so I think the question goes way beyond language, and it's about how we honor and respect different ideas. And we don't do that very well in institutional perspectives, in colonial perspectives, and the unfortunate part is most of the people that I'm interacting with, and I'm thinking about a particular UN conference that was in Argentina, and so a lot of it was in Spanish, and we were conducting some of our conversations in Spanish, but it was also a UN conference, and so there were other languages being spoken as well. There were some of the keynotes that were in English, and lots of multilingual things happening. But you got the sense that for most people, their sort of cultural background and cultural ideas were pretty similar. They were all from a very similar class. And so their understanding of what is incentivized, what is good, what we should strive for, was informed not only by their language, but also the social systems and structures and that they've grown up in and how they've been socially conditioned. And in a global context, it is predominantly quote-unquote Western or English ideas that dominate the institutions that are provided or afforded that elevated status from which a lot of these people will then go to places like the United Nations to have conversations about the future of humanity. And that's a real failure. I am thinking back, and I want to make sure I get this right, I can't think of any even semblance of indigenous representation. And I'm not talking about from a Canadian context, I'm talking about a global context at that kind of conference. It's all people who are quote-unquote professionals and quote-unquote technocrats and bureaucrats, and it's so removed from everyday life. And so it's very, very hard to be in a space like that because I feel that I bring some of that, some of those perspectives, but if they're not necessarily heard in the right way, or not really valued in the right way, and you're always fighting against the predominant cultural, conceptual understandings, you have to first fight against that, and then you have to put in place what you would like to contribute. But by the time you've started the battle, time's up. It's okay. So again, that's part of the design and part of the system. So it's a much broader question about what rights and responsibilities we carry, and I think that the languages, yes, influence our cultural perspectives, and they give us the tools. They also mean that we just have so much work to do, and so that's a responsibility that I carry with me a lot, and in my work with undergraduate students here at UBC, it's something that does very much inform my work. It's how do we think about these ideas, and I had a conversation, I think it was on a Tuesday of this week, with a student in our professional space, where we essentially just talked about how everything here is made up. This whole idea of like what time you arrive to come to work, what time you go, these are all made up ideas. And maybe I'll just share one fun story, because I feel like everything I've talked about is maybe a bit more abstract, but a fun story, it was a young musician in Tanzania, and they're signed to a big record label. And they do an interview with the BBC. And I don't think the interviewer actually understood what was happening here, but it was fun for me to watch from a cultural perspective. The interviewer asked the person, so you've just been signed to this big record company, and you're now going to be going to all these countries around the world, and it's a really Western approach from the record label. How has that changed your life? And they thought they were going to talk about the stardom, the fame, the audience, the exposure to the music, maybe the finances, all of these things. And in all seriousness, they said, we have to show up on time now. And the interviewer completely lost, they had no concept, they just completely missed it. And the people, these musicians, these late 18, 19, 20 years old, they were being fully serious. That we've got this huge record deal, and the thing that changed in their life was they have to show up on time to perform their music. They have to show up on time to have meetings with people from the record label. And that was the biggest thing that changed in their life. And the interviewer missed this moment completely, and they moved on to the next piece. And I just thought there was this huge moment to unpack and explore this cultural difference here. And because we have those ideas of professionalism, etc., here you can see a moment where these musicians may not be afforded more of an opportunity to continue sharing their music with the world because they might not show up to certain meetings on time. And if people don't understand the difference between sort of cultural conceptions of time, well, now the world has just lost access to some beautiful music. How unfortunate. And so it happens everywhere.
All right. Well, thank you, Avni.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yes.
Okay, this might sound cheesy, but I think that you touched on what I would say is the art of translation. So like, it's not word for word, but it's translating meaning, and that might help with avoiding that what you're talking about, the sort of heavy English meanings into things. So yeah, I think it's very much an art, and that's what the machines can't do.
Exactly. Thank you for that last little tidbit. All right, so everyone, that does bring us to the end of tonight's panel. Sorry. We will have, the alumni will be here at the end, or in the next minute, so if you would like to come and ask them any more questions, please feel free to do so. I just want to extend a big thank you to all of our panelists here today, to alumni UBC. This experience was extremely valuable, and thank you for sharing your advice with us. And thanks to all of you for attending. We hope tonight's discussion gave you something to think about as you plan your undergraduate journey, and what you take away from this in your multilingual careers, perhaps. You can learn more about Arts alumni and their career stories by visiting the online Arts Alumni panel profiles page at arts.ubc.ca/alumni. The Arts Career Conversation Series is one of 7 pathways of programming that operate through the Compass Arts Student Engagement Hub. Very cool discussions. You can visit arts.ubc/compass to learn more about this new initiative as well. You just have to click on the Careers Online portal to register for career advising appointments and more career development events, including the West Coast Virtual Fair, a career and graduate school fair happening tomorrow, actually. And of course, Arts Multilingual Week continues with 5 more events happening across campus tomorrow and Friday, so please make sure to check all of them out. Don't miss out. It's been a really fun week so far. There's been so many things happening. And finally, we would really appreciate if you would take a minute right now to use the link on the screen, there's no QR code, is there? No? Okay, just the link, to tell us what you've learned and help us improve future arts career conversation events like this for the future. And tonight's alumni panelists, like I said earlier, will be sticking around after I finish up here, so we encourage you to stay and chat with them and with each other. There is still, I think there might still be some coffee, and there's 1 cookie left, so whoever gets there first. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy your evening.
That's the evaluation form there. If you'd like, that's the evaluation form there. Yes. Okay. We will like one. Yeah, of course. There you go. No worries. Did you guys? Awesome. Thanks so much.